Today's event is part of a continuous series of activities that the Foundation for Strategic Research is conducting all over the world. Well, of course, virtually now, given the circumstances. Those activities are led with the support of the European Union. These activities aim to promote the universalization of the Hague Code of Conduct, which is the only multilateral instrument dealing with ballistic proliferation. They also seek to foster a constructive and inclusive dialogue on ballistic missile proliferation challenges itself. So it's very much the topic we are going to explore today. As we have only 1 hour of discussion, I will be very brief. Just note that we thought it was very important to hold this session today to talk about the other multilateral efforts aiming at curbing ballistic proliferation, both ongoing and future, and especially in a context where we just saw the adoption by the UNGA of Resolution 7560 in support of the Hague Code of Conduct. So this session will give us an opportunity to talk about a bit about the resolution, to dig a little bit deeper and understand the perspective of states on different confidence-building measures on missiles, and maybe explore a bit also the links between different instruments aiming at tackling these issues. To evoke this subject, we are going to have a short conversation today with Ambassador Benno LAGGNER from the permanent mission of Switzerland in Vienna and the current chair of the Hague Code of Conduct, George Wilhelm Karlhofer, representative of the HCoC Immediate Central Contact at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Austria, Michael Spies, acting head of Science and Technology Unit at UNODA, and Alexandre Daillet, Secretary General of the Fondation of Strategic Research. We should then have a few minutes left for a few Q&A that you can feel free to start asking in the Q&A box of WebEx in a written format. Please don't hesitate to select all panelists as you do so that we can all see your questions. And we will conclude this session right on time with Ambassador Marilyn van Gillen, that you probably know as the Special Envoy for Non-Proliferation and Disarmament of the European Union. I would like, of course, to thank all panelists and especially Ambassador van Gillen for the repeated trust and support of the EU for this project, which enabled us to conduct this event today. So now, without further ado, I will turn to our panelists and ask especially Ambassador LAGGNER to comment a little bit on the recent resolution that was adopted by the UNGA, and maybe tell us a little bit what we can learn from the recent vote and what were the priorities of the chair in sponsoring this resolution.
Thank you, Emmanuelle. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me first of all thank the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique for organizing this event. And I would also like to express my appreciation for the support that the European Union has been giving on a very regular basis to these outreach activities. As you mentioned already, the most recent resolution was adopted on the 7th of December last year, with a record number of 176 member states voting in favor of the resolution, 10 abstentions, and 1 member state voting against the resolution. Now, these resolutions have been tabled on a biennial basis since 2008. So obviously, our main priority was to increase the level of support for the resolution compared to the previous one in 2018. And I'm very pleased to say that we were successful. We had the highest ever number of member states supporting the resolution, 176, 5 more than in 2018. We had the lowest number of abstentions, 10, compared to 12 in 2018. And we had 187 member states actually taking part in the vote. So only 6 of the UN member states did not take part in the vote in the General Assembly. Now, the main lesson that I would really draw from our experience is the importance of targeted bilateral outreach. First of all, the resolution is, of course, discussed within the subscribing states, and the text is agreed among the subscribing states before it is then shared with the non-subscribing states. And we undertook at different levels very targeted outreach with the non-subscribing states. The priorities were, there are a number of non-subscribing states that have supported the resolution on a regular basis. So of course we démarched them bilaterally. We had non-subscribing states that had voted for the first time in favor in 2018. So of course we also approached them. We also had our foreign minister write letters to his counterparts. We identified a number of countries that had abstained in the past, but had occasionally also voted yes, but abstained in 2018. And so again, we had our foreign minister write letters to his counterparts, and 4 of the countries actually changed their position and voted yes in 2020. And then, of course, we also asked our mission in New York, particularly, to just make sure that as many countries as possible would actually participate in the vote. So there were démarches at different levels, from the capitals, the minister, the mission in New York, and I think really it showed the importance of preparing very well a series of targeted bilateral outreach activities.
Thank you very much. How important would you say these resolutions are for the code, and do you think that they really managed to raise the profile of the code for subscribing but also non-subscribing states that are voting in favor of those resolutions?
Definitely, they're very important, but just let me maybe add something that I forgot to mention at the beginning. As you mentioned correctly, I'm the chair, the current chair of the code, but I'm speaking today in my personal and national capacity. No, these resolutions are very important in terms of legitimizing the code. As most participants will know, the code was negotiated and adopted by interested states in 2002 outside of the UN framework. And this has frequently been mentioned as a concern by some states, namely states from the non-aligned movement, that have been hesitant to subscribe to the code, and that as a matter of general principle are reluctant to support initiatives that have not been mandated by the UN. But the fact that we have now had 9 resolutions of the UN General Assembly since 2004, with an ever-increasing number of member states supporting these resolutions, and 176 now last year, the resolutions welcoming the code and actually explicitly inviting all states that have not yet subscribed to do so, I think this clearly now shows how the legitimacy of the code has been strengthened by these resolutions. It also demonstrates that the code has now quasi-universal support from the UN member states, from all regions of the world, and from all political groups.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gallagher, is it also something that you see as, of course, representing the ICC, the Intermediate Central Contact in Vienna?
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody, and thanks for the invitation. Yes, I quite share it. I deal with the code also from the ministry side, and if I may, I'll comment it particularly from the point of view of the foreign ministry role that I have. And I mean, for us, we see the resolution as being quite important, not just to drive for universalization, but also to keep it on the agenda, because it also provides, when we do outreach for the resolution, a really good opportunity also to engage and to discuss in more depth with colleagues that haven't become members to the code yet, what the benefits are and how the code actually can be a positive force also for them. I think it's also a very useful tool for those countries that aren't quite ready yet to join the code to demonstrate their strong support without actually joining the code. Of course, in terms of the sort of effects of the resolutions, also, I think there's probably still some room for improvement. Indeed, the resolution itself, in its text, if you look at the 6th operational paragraph, is very clear that we need to continue to explore further ways and means to deal with the problem of proliferation and to deepen the relationship between the code and the United Nations. So there is still room for further work on this, and it's also an aim that is set and that has been endorsed now, as the ambassador rightly pointed out, by the membership. And I would actually argue that in light of the challenges we currently face, especially with the demise of the bilateral instruments relevant to the area, making progress both within the forum provided by the Hague Code, but also the UN framework is really more important than ever. So further work, I think, is something that that we should be looking into also over the coming months and years. Thank you.
Thank you. Alexandre Daillé, this resolution is the 9th that has been adopted on the code. At the FRS, we have been following them very closely. What lessons have you drawn from the previous resolution and from the evolution maybe of those texts in the last couple of years?
Sorry, thank you. As has already been pointed out by the ambassador, there's been a very regular increase in the number of yes votes, and even a marked one in the last few years. We are now at an all-time high with 176 votes in favor of the latest resolution. The number of no votes is quite constant, with only one state systematically voting against the resolution. There was actually another state who voted no also in 2004, but then that state has abstained on the following resolutions. And the number of abstentions has also been decreasing in the last few years, down to 10. As regards the support that the Hague Code of Conduct gains from the votes on these resolutions, it is clearly, of course, from Europe that HCoC gets the most support, and in the Middle East that it gets the least support, but it gets high support in the Americas, in Africa, and a bit less so, but a majority of support in Asia. So it's very well, I would say, spread out in terms of region, and especially if we examine the votes from non-subscribing states.
Thank you very much. I think we have among the attendees 2 former chairs or representative of the chairs, and I think it would be maybe interesting to hear, especially of Sweden, who had been working 2 years ago for the promotion of the previous resolution, UNGR resolution on the code. I don't know if Ambassador Nilsson is here and can hear us, but it would be useful also to maybe give her perspective and her feedback on these outreach efforts and how they were conducted 2 years ago, and maybe the progresses that have been made also in this interval. I think Ambassador Nilsson is joining us. Can you join the conversation? Yes, excellent. It seems that it's working. We can see your name appear. We can unmute. Or maybe we can keep going with Alexandre and Ambassador Nilsson. Whenever you're ready, you'll be able to give your feedback. But it would be also useful, as you mentioned, a number of states that are not part of the code voting in favor of the resolutions, maybe to give your perception of how these states feel about the code and why this discrepancy in the numbers, that would be also very useful, given the historic perspective you also have on these resolutions.
Well, sorry, Emmanuelle, do you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
You might not be able to see me, but I can see you.
Okay, well, please go ahead.
If I, first of all, sorry for the technical disturbances, but really, really good to see all of you. Sweden, and I had the honor to be the chair 2 years ago, and that was also when we when we also were responsible for the resolution in the UN General Assembly. But first, warm congratulations to Switzerland and to Benno. You've made a record high of reaching 176 votes. I think that as you said, that shows really that this is an important instrument. It has a very it's very practical, and there is when you can reach out with the good arguments, you can also little by little reach further in support, and that is of course builds on the multilateral angle and cooperation that is so important in these days. And I think what we did during our, and you also did it during COVID-19, when it was harder to work the room, or you even couldn't in New York, so you had to take a lot of measures, as you described beforehand, and using your network as a chair. I think it's also very important, and I think the work that is being done by FRS, supported by the European Union, is also extremely important, and not also by Austria, providing year by year the ICC and the competence, that we really can work also as all members, that we all have a platform and a responsibility to speak about the Hague Code and what it actually can achieve. So we did that, but I've seen that Switzerland has taken it a step further. But I think as subscribing states, we all should carry that responsibility with pride and joy, actually moving in the right direction. Also considering that the realities out there give us a reason to do so. But so, and also that I just want to mention, maybe as the last comment, it's also important that we continue to work internally. The better the instrument is, the better implemented it is, the better we are positioned to promote it to others. I stop there and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nielsen. It was very precious to have not only the current chair, but also the previous chair among us today. So very useful to hear your comments. Alexandra, I turn back to you with this idea once again that we have a number of states that are maybe not ready to join, as George Gillen mentioned earlier, but vote in favor of the resolution. So quite interesting to know how you see the reasoning behind those states' position, and I think a very positive, once again, positive sign that the code is being gradually accepted as a norm.
Yes, indeed. A clear majority of non-subscribing states to the Hague Code of Conduct actually do vote yes to those resolutions. For example, the latest resolution was backed by 75% of non-subscribing states. So it's a clear sign of support for the code. Conversely, of course, a sizable proportion, of course, of yes votes come from non-subscribing states. A majority of those non-subscribing states have voted yes to 5 or more resolutions in support of the Hague Code of Conduct. 62% of non-subscribing states have backed 5 resolutions or more. A third of them have voted yes to all 9 resolutions. So this gives a very clear sense, once again, of the, I would say, legitimacies that the code has, and of the support it deserves in the UN framework, I would say. Just to complete this a little bit, also, there's some interesting trends to observe, as the Ambassador LAGGNER has already mentioned. There were first-time yes voters in 2018. Those were actually 6 states. Only 1 state did not vote yes again in 2020, but so the previous 5 did so, and also 4 states that had abstained in 2018 voted yes in 2020. So just to conclude on this point, most non-subscribing states to the code vote yes. Only 1 has systematically voted against, and very few actually have never voted yes. Actually, only 9 non-subscribing states have not voted yes to any resolutions in support of the Hague Code of Conduct.
Ambassador LAGGNER, what are the main messages you get from these states in your outreach efforts?
Yes, thank you. Well, let me first of all thank Anne-Sophie for the kind words. And I think we were able to achieve this excellent result because we were able to build on a very good foundation that Sweden had prepared during its chairmanship. Now, Alexandra already mentioned the high number of non-subscribing states that vote in favor of the resolution, 39 out of 52 non-subscribing states. And I think this clearly underlines several things. First of all, it underlines that this issue is a matter of concern not only to subscribing states, but also to non-subscribing states. It also shows that non-subscribing states see the positive vote as a means to demonstrate their commitment to non-proliferation and to enhancing regional and international security. Now, ideally, voting in favor of the resolution would be just the first step towards eventually becoming a subscribing state. But while most non-subscribing states fully share the objective of the code, there are still a variety of reasons why they are hesitant to subscribe. Some smaller states are concerned about the possible administrative burden of filing an annual declaration every year. But I think here we can really also demonstrate to them that there are also simplified formats for countries without ballistic missile programs. So it's not really a big administrative burden at all. There is no cost involved. Some states, as I mentioned before, are concerned that the code was negotiated outside of the UN context. I think now with 176 UN member states supporting it, it has been fully embraced by the UN membership. Some are concerned because of their specific regional security situation. We've, I think, already had the Middle East mentioned. I mean, the Middle East is one of the regions where we have a lot of states that have not yet subscribed to the code. And of course, it is difficult if you have a regional countries about whose activities you are concerned and they do not subscribe, then it does not necessarily provide an incentive for you to subscribe. So here we have a regional context. There are some states who think the code is not ambitious enough. They will prefer a legally binding instrument, or an instrument that would also include cruise missiles, for example. So there are a number of reasons why countries do not subscribe. I think when we actually talk to them on a bilateral basis, we can pretty well, I think, find arguments to counter the points or concerns they have. And then we just have also a number of countries that fully share the objectives, but for example, have difficult internal domestic procedures. They might need to have parliamentary approval. And we all know that it's not always easy to get parliamentary approval, to get the attention of parliaments and to have things approved in parliament. So there are a variety of reasons. But I think the fact that 75%, as Alexander mentioned, vote yes in support of the resolution is very encouraging.
Thank you very much. You mentioned some of the reasons, very, very interesting. Of course, the non-proliferation, disarmament environment is moving very fast these years in all kinds of direction. And we've seen that the CBMs, such as the code, which are modest by definition, which have only which can play a specific role in this architecture, can be also criticized for not aiming high enough. Next week, we're going to witness the entry into force of the TPNW. How can we articulate those different kind of mechanisms with very different objectives? Mr. Gallagher, what are your views on this?
Thank you very much. And yes, I mean, here again, of course, this is something that I will say from the Austrian viewpoint, particularly rather than from the Hague Code of Conduct point of viewpoint. But I think what's important is to distinguish the aims of the instruments. The TPNW is an instrument to further the implementation of existing obligations that already are there under the MPT, and also came about given the lack of progress under the Article 6 implementation. It's of course a confidence building measure by virtue of the clear commitment to never build, obtain nuclear weapons, etc., but also via the safeguard requirements, which are of a higher level than the NPT. But what the TPNW does is it focuses explicitly on the comprehensive prohibition of nuclear weapons, and explicitly does not aim to tackle the delivery side, delivery systems side, and for good reasons. The Hague Code of Conduct really starts from a very different starting point. It doesn't really aim at any prohibition. It's really meant to just improve confidence and trust building. And in fact, the bulk of the work of the code really does confirm exactly that, the information exchange about very often civilian activities such as space launches, but also, of course, military and missile programs and launches. And the idea being to make these launches as safe as possible, and therefore in turn to improve trust and predictability. Now, the implementation challenges, I think, there stem more from technical issues such as short delays in terms of before launching, and also questions on how prescriptive the code should be. So in the end, it's a very different aim, and I think they're very complementary in the sense that they deal with different parts of the arms limitation, arms control, disarmament part. But of course, they also are quite mutually complementary, I would say, because you need that kind of trust building in order to make progress. And especially in delivery systems, you might come to that later more. There still seems to be a shortage, and if anything, a step backwards in terms of the disarmament or arms control efforts that were there. With, of course, many instruments now having been abandoned, having ended up in demise. So for us, I mean, it would be encouraging to see the entry into force of the TPNW to contribute to a more thorough debate also on potential delivery vehicles or the security impact of the missiles in a more general dimension, and to also make progress in that direction. But it's, I think, a linked but separate discussion.
Thank you very much. Michael Spies, from a UNODA perspective, how do you see this articulation between legally binding treaties that are having different challenges and different results in past years, and this kind of very topical CBM, which is more, as Mr. Gallagher said, more technical, addressing one part of the issue? How do you see those links, and maybe how do you help convince states of the importance of both mechanisms?
Well, first off, very much thank you to FRS for inviting me to participate, and I think this speaks to an objective in these resolutions, which is to deepen the relationship between the code and the UN, and so in that spirit, very happy to be able to participate in the event. On your question, I very much agree with points raised by George Wilhelm on the first instance. Expectations around missile controls are very distinct from expectations around the weapons that they carry, and in particular WMD. There's certainly wide recognition and appreciation of the complexity around missile issues, which makes it very difficult to consider a single approach that or something that is so specific and concrete, like a prohibition treaty, for instance. And in fact, there are a wide range of different policy options that have been pursued in relation to missiles, including reductions, limitations, transparency, and confidence building measures, or other regulations that are implemented on a variety of levels. And so, in terms of the level of ambition, it really does have to match the specific concerns and the objectives. So that's sort of one point. A second point that George Willem also alluded to, in the context of the TPNW, but also elsewhere, is that it's also becoming more difficult, not easier, to address issues of missiles, even within a UN context. And this is, I think, reflected in particular, and this was discussed in the context of the TPNW negotiations. So there was consideration and effect of drawing an identical linkage between treatment of means of delivery in that treaty and the NPT, and for reasons the negotiators decided not to contemplate that, to keep these issues distinct and separately. And another example is the conference on establishment of a zone in the Middle East free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. The topic of means of delivery is within the terms of reference of issues that have been given to that conference, and yet there has not been automatic acceptance of addressing this issue in that context because of this complexity. And so my overall point is that it seems perfectly reasonable that confidence building measures has to be part of the solution set in dealing with this, and in that sense, the code really does provide a platform which to build, and I will point to some specific examples of that later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to stay with you, but I would just remind the audience that if you have questions, feel free to write them as soon as you want in the Q&A, so we are aware of them, as time is of course passing quite fast. Michael, I'm staying with you actually to really get your sense on these efforts to link the code, to link these kind of CBMs with the UN. It's a quite interesting example. These resolutions, of course, we explain are an opportunity to remind that there is this broad support from the UNGA in favor of this mechanism. How important is that for this kind of mechanism, but also on the UN side to be able to have this link with these instruments?
All right, thank you. I would say that it's absolutely vital. To pick up on a point that Ambassador LAGGNER raised, the endorsement of the code by the General Assembly and its broad support really speaks to its legitimacy. And as a practical matter, this resolution and the support it receives really unlocks the ability of the UN system to engage with the code to assist states when they approach the UN to seek assistance in its promotion. So this is all absolutely vital in terms of the support. In terms of the substance, we could point to some specific examples. For instance, the 2013 report of the group of governmental experts on transparency and confidence building measures in outer space agreed to a measure on pre-launch notifications that explicitly referenced the code. And so in my view, it's the fact that this had already been brought into the General Assembly and accepted set the stage for this sort of cross-fertilization of issues there. And another important reason why it's important to have these things brought into the UN and given that sort of broader legitimacy. And a third vein, bringing the code within the UN has certainly served as a means for broadening the engagement with the non-subscribing states, those states who might hesitate because of the fact that it was developed and negotiated outside the UN. Once it's brought into the UN, you have many other options for engaging and dialogue and how to not just bring additional states on board, but also how to further develop measures relating to missiles and all of its aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandre. As part of our activities, we have at FRS been able to not only follow the debate in New York, but also organize side events over there. What have been the lessons learned in this regard?
Well, as is often mentioned, the Hague Code of Conduct was not developed within the UN framework. This has been labelled the original sin of the code. Well, as early as February 2003, the Dutch chair then of the code sent the text and the list of its signatories to the UN Secretary General for the information of the General Assembly already. And I would also point out that the development and the reinforcement of the link between the Hague Code of Conduct and the UN has also been a priority of the European Union since at least 2003. So this has permeated our debates very regularly. I would also like to underline that in its very substance, in its very text, the code contains references to the United Nations texts, first of all to the UN Charter, then to some UN texts and treaties governing especially outer space, so namely the UN Declaration on Outer Space adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1996, the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, adopted in 1967, the Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects from 1972, and finally, the Convention on Registration of Objects Launched into Outer Space adopted in 1975. So, already in the very text of the HCoC, we see a link with the multilateral system as is. Also establishing a link with the UN through the UNGA resolutions has been seen as having a big advantage, that is keeping the code associated with the rest of all the initiatives and debates on global arms control and disarmament, while I would say distancing it from its very origins. But then again, and we're very short of time, but when one looks into the genesis of the code, we know that there have been some attempts at having discussions on the means of delivery of WMDs at the UN level, but that those did not actually lead on to any concrete results. So I would say that's also a reason why the code was not adopted within the UN framework.
Yeah, thank you. We can maybe jump on that with Michael's piece. What are the other UN initiatives where synergies can actually be built with the Hague Code of Conduct? So,
building on kind of the remarks that I mentioned earlier in the realm of outer space is indeed one example, in fact, of how not the code as such, but specific aspects and objectives and measures within the code have already been brought into UN instruments, and then it becomes a question in that context of implementation and indeed in this specific aspect. On outer space TCBMs, this is a matter that has been referred to the Disarmament Commission, where it has an active agenda item on the implementation of outer space TCBMs. And so this is sort of one type of synergy that exists. Another perhaps unexplored type of synergy in this regard would relate to the Register of Conventional Arms, which does also deal with a different aspect of transparency and confidence building. It has a regular review mechanism and there again is sort of an opportunity because of that regularity for engagement with specific aspects of the code. I think it remains to be seen what kind of a relationship can be built there, but it's just sort of an idea to flag. Another area is the value of regional approaches and dialogues. I think this has been a component of outreach of the code in recent years, one that ODA has been able to participate in and support, and there's tremendous value in that. So one particular venue I've already mentioned has been the discussion of not just of new nuclear weapon-free zones, but existing nuclear weapon-free zones. For instance, we have the fourth conference of nuclear weapon-free zones scheduled to take place in July, and I think there's sort of potential for sort of engagement with other these sort of instruments and meetings within the UN context. So those are just sort of two of the areas, and finally, again on outer space, we do now have a new process, so to speak, a new resolution on reducing space threats through norms, rules, principles of responsible behavior, and this again is seeking views of member states to be analyzed in a report by the Secretary General. So another opportunity for states to kind of reflect on these connections, and particularly with a view to how further engagement within the UN can help support either further elaboration of measures or their implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we now project ourselves a little bit in the future, how do you see the UN Forum being used to continue to resume also discussion on missile proliferation?
Well, as a starting point, I mean, and this is always a challenge because of what I mentioned earlier, that the complexity of the issues, and the fact that there isn't necessarily going to be a single set of measures or type of instruments, but you might need a variety of approaches. In recent outreach, the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, in a speech last December, identified a number of issues for how to, further engage UN forums in this. And one suggestion she made was the need to start work at expert level on a common lexicon for missiles, and to use this as sort of a basis for dialogue, but facilitating greater understanding and unlocking approaches to future considerations. And the need for that, in our view, reflects just the difficulty that other UN bodies, and in particular the Security Council, has had around even definitions like ballistic missile when they appear in a Security Council resolution without any clear kind of understanding of what that means. And I also note the code itself lacks a definition for ballistic missiles, and this can be a real challenge. And so, in our view, this kind of technical work could be a starting point to help move past this sort of issue.
Judge Wilhelm Kalhofer, before we turn to a few questions we have received, do you have any comments to add on this perspective for further engagement at the UN level as well?
Thank you. I think Michael has laid it out very ably, both the challenge, but also the fragmentation at the moment at the UN level. The question of whether you deal with this more in sort of regional issues, technical issues, thematic, particular in space, etc. I think that's also a question that I think as the UN membership we need to ask ourselves. Is that the best approach? Is that the most effective approach? Is that the politically most sort of workable approach at the moment? Of course, the urgency I think should egg us on to also answer these questions quite urgently. I mean, not only do these issues touch on a wide range of issues that we deal with at the UN, from disarmament, arms control, and all kinds of categories of weapons, but also to, say, concrete security situations, for example, in the peacekeeping area. And of course, you see all the new developments now with new technologies also creating further urgency. So I think the challenge is now that I think the urgency keeps increasing, but we haven't actually found a good answer yet to really deal with it. But very much appreciate the the High Representative's approach there to already propose some good first steps to go into that direction. Of course, the question is also how, you know, what element can the Hague Code provide there? And I mean, existing CVMs there are an obvious starting point also for discussions, and the Hague Code of Conduct actually provides explicitly a forum to discuss issues related to missiles and missile proliferation. So there's also the possibility of enhancing the use of that forum to have expert level discussions, and then maybe bring that to the wider membership of the UN. But of course, it's an issue that that goes beyond just the HCoC membership, and should therefore really be discussed by the UN as such. But central, of course, to that is to get an acceptance by all that it's a matter that concerns the security of all, and therefore is best dealt with by a multilateral approach and not just a sort of piecemeal approach. So yeah, I think we're quite at the sort of at an earlier process still, but I think it's the urgency keeps increasing, and we at the UN really need to look at this with great urgency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have received a couple of questions, especially on the Hague Code of Conduct. I will distribute them a little bit right now, and start maybe with you, George Wilhelm. We have two questions that maybe you can address. One from Mr. Fuentes on the way that the Hague Code of Conduct can address emerging technologies in the field of missile, especially hypersonic, and maybe we can also answer at the same time Mark Fino's question on the way the code can include or not cruise missiles and maybe UAV as well. So maybe you can start with this question, these two questions actually combined.
Thank you. You've given me the easy ones. No, this is thank you very much for the very good questions. I mean, one of the ways that the Hague Code of Conduct was set up was explicitly to allow a certain amount of leeway in terms of the interpretation of the rules as to what should be reported, what should be included. That was made on purpose in order to come to an agreement that all could come around to and agree to the code. So there is a certain leeway for it, but there has been, I would argue, a rather slow progress in terms of trying to sort of firm up definitions or to include new categories within the code. And that's certainly something that we as Austria have been quite keen, and there've been others who've been very progressive on this and trying very, very much to firm up definitions, to come up with definitions that could work for all. But so far, unfortunately, that has not yet come to any conclusions. So I would say work is ongoing, especially on the question of the definitions and what kind of categories are included. And we're looking, and there also I would like to highlight the very good work of FRS, who are very good in keeping us up to date on new technologies, on the new challenges that arise in the side events that are provided by the FRS. On the new technologies, but the code, like the UN, unfortunately, has not really sort of come around to substantive changes or discussions on those issues, which I think, from an Austrian perspective, would be a very good thing to have. But unfortunately, so far, that hasn't happened yet.
Thank you very much. I turn maybe to Michael Spies for a question by Noel Stott. A very interesting, challenging question. Maybe the idea that the code could, to some extent, prevent progress being made on a more legally binding instrument to control missile proliferation. What are your views on this?
I don't know that I fully, agree with the premise that the code prevents, discussions, and in fact, quite the contrary. I think, as I've pointed out, not just by the fact that it's in existence, it's broadly accepted, but in fact, it has proven as sort of a model that can be built upon in other contexts, and so and it's been a vehicle for bringing this issue into the UN, and for probably many participants aware that there have been various efforts within the UN at different levels to address the issue of missiles with sort of mixed success, and so if there is a potential to use this as a platform to build, I think it's rather an opportunity. And so I would sort of encourage people to look at it from that perspective. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm keeping a very substantive question for Ambassador LAGGNER, but maybe quickly before that, Alexandre, we had a question from Gugu Dubé, ISS, on the outreach efforts that are especially put in place on the African continent. So maybe you can give us a couple of information on that.
Yes, we actually have conducted several outreach efforts in Africa for the past 2 years, dedicated first to Francophone African states, then to Southern African states. We were in Zambia gathering members of SADC in about a year and a half ago, and then we also dedicated a regional seminar to Eastern Africa. We were in Djibouti in September 2019, and also all this coupled with, I would say, more targeted outreach towards individual states. And now, regarding the future efforts, this is still in the planning, but of course we are very much keeping Africa in our minds in planning our future outreach efforts. So of course it's a very wide-ranging question, because of course depending on where in Africa you are located, it would probably make more sense to have a bit more targeted outreach, but indeed Africa is certainly very central to our efforts.
Thank you very much. Ambassador LAGGNER, I turn to you for a question on which I know you could speak for a very long time, but it will have to be very brief. And it's, of course, the question of what are the justification, the interest for a state to join the Hague Code of Conduct. It's a question by Ambassador Soltanier. And last arrival among the Q&A, maybe you can also touch upon it's to what extent the Hague Code of Conduct is an instrument that can be promoted in the discussions on the ballistic programs of the DPRK and Iran. So if you can wrap us up with the Q&A in a couple of minutes, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Emmanuelle. Now, to the question of Ambassador Soltanier, what are the benefits? I mean, the benefits for subscribing to the code, obviously, you can benefit from the transparency measures that other states undertake. So you, as a subscriber to the code, you have access to the information provided by other subscribing states, their annual declarations, the pre-launch notifications. So this is security relevant information, which has a very practical benefit. I will just mention one other thing. Subscribing to the code is, of course, an opportunity to underline a commitment to non-proliferation, a commitment to enhancing regional and global security. And it's actually a very easy way of demonstrating your commitment, because the code is a low threshold instrument. And that maybe also ties into the question we had on a legally binding instrument. I mean, I think one of the big advantages of the code is that it is a low threshold instrument. It's not ambitious, yes, that's true, but this actually makes it probably easier for a number of countries to sign up to the code. So I think these are some important elements. I didn't quite get the last question that you had mentioned, sorry.
Yeah, it was to what extent outreach efforts to promote the subscription and implementation of the code by countries such as Iran and DPRK could be part of the global negotiations that are ongoing on the ballistic programs of these states?
Well, we haven't undertaken any specific outreach efforts to these countries, but both countries, of course, come from regions where we have a number of important countries that have not yet subscribed to the code, Asia and the Middle East. And so I would highlight this fact. It's not only about maybe these two countries, it's about two regions where we have significant countries, also countries possessing ballistic missiles programs that are not subscribing states. We have made an effort to focus in our priorities, outreach priorities, on these two areas, not on specific individual countries, but rather trying to approach this in a regional context. I've had the opportunity to participate in an event that you organized, a regional workshop. I also participated in a dialogue with the Missile Dialogue Initiative, hosted, focusing on the region. As for the Middle East, we are still exploring whether we will maybe be able to organize also an online event with a think tank in Geneva, which would focus on the Middle East. So that will be obviously, of course, an opportunity to invite Iranian participants to this discussion. And maybe just ending on the Middle East, as I said, it has been one of our focus areas. And I'm very glad that actually 4 of the countries that switched from an abstention to a positive vote on the resolution are from the Middle East. So I think it's maybe small steps that we need to take, but that was, I think, an important step. But as you said, we also had to focus on certain areas, and especially maybe also in the areas where we had in our analysis a feeling that we could maybe be able to make a difference. These were maybe, so this was also maybe why we didn't focus on the 2 countries you mentioned, but rather on countries where we felt we would be able to maybe influence them to change their voting position.
Thank you very much, Ambassador LAGGNER. Thanks to everybody. We are, I think, not too bad in terms of schedule, so I will now yield the floor for concluding remarks to Ambassador Van Gillen, and thank her, of course, again for the opportunity to have these activities within this very important EU-sponsored program.
All right. Thank you very much, Emmanuelle. And I thought this was really an excellent exchange, very substantive, very good. And even though it was only an hour, we covered a lot of ground. I would very much like to thank the panelists and also the participants that were here in great number. And of course, I'd like to congratulate Ambassador LAGGNER with the results of the vote. It has broken records, as was set out by many, and that proves really the wide support for the Hague Code of Conduct, and also shows that we're on a path to universalization of the code. But in addition, it also proves the importance of outreach in explaining what it is, the importance of dialogue. I think of every vote in favor, especially from non-subscribing states to the code, proved that we were successful in setting out the value of these instruments. Of course, global challenges cannot be dealt with by one country or one group of countries. We need multilateralism, and the UN provides the platform par excellence for that. This was very good to hear Michael speak about cross-fertilization also with other UN processes. None of these are standalone events or mechanisms. But it's all part of a wider architecture. Now, ballistic missiles are a very important part of that. They form a global challenge, and the UN Security Council even expressed itself multiple times on the risks to international peace and security that they may pose. And HCoC is a contribution to tackling that challenge. And in that sense, it is very fitting that through an UNGA resolution, this process developed outside of the UN is brought back in. It's a very good mechanism to bring that back into the UN, to be able to discuss it there, and being fully compatible with other events. So finally, I'd just like to thank FRS for organizing this event. I haven't thanked you yet. Today's event is part of a series of events that you're doing, which are funded by the EU, part of our support for HCoC, and that are implemented by FRS. So a lot still to come from your side, a lot already done, like the outreach mentioned. So thanks again to everybody, FRS, panelists, and participants, and looking forward to the next event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the panelists, all the attendees, the great questions. I'm going to end this webinar now, and by doing so, hoping to stay in contact. To keep the dialogue going on these issues. 1 hour is a short time, of course, to tackle it, but I think we really managed to cover some ground. So please keep in touch. We are organizing a number of events, as was mentioned. We are also writing papers, hopefully trying to cover some issues associated with ballistic proliferation and the code. So once again, thank you, and have a great day or afternoon, whether we are, whatever your time zone is. Bye bye.